I'm reminded of Lincoln and the Peoria Address, who thought he was going back to the founding to reestablish the principles of Washington, Madison, Jefferson, and so on. When he criticized Stephen Douglas, because he said that Douglas was striking at the heart of what America meant when he brought forth the idea of self-interest as the fundamental basis of what it meant to be an American. And Lincoln said, that's when you criticize the Declaration of Independence and insist there's no just principle of action but self-interest, then that is no longer America as we know it. Because what we have to emphasize instead is that the very foundation of liberty rests in a central idea. It has to do with interest, you can call it self-interest if you will, but that self-interest is always defined with a moral foundation. Madison also said this in a letter, I believe it was to Monroe, when he said, yeah, we can talk about interest and the relationship of interest to justice, but he said, it doesn't have any bearing unless you qualify interest with every necessary moral ingredient. And that moral ingredient has to do with the idea of recognizing other human beings as human beings and treating them as such. So there's a real positive moral component, I think, at the basis of liberty in America. And I wondered if you would speak to that.
I don't, I don't think that anybody would say, I don't believe you would say, that it's okay for the government to forcibly use one person to serve the purposes of another. Because indeed, that's the ultimate, that's what slavery in fact was, the forcible use of one person to serve the purpose of another. And so what we're talking about is degrees of that. Yeah. And I think that even before we got to where we were, Americans are the most generous people on the face of this earth. And that is, our country does, we can be quite proud of our fellow Americans, we do 80% of all world giving. And this was a characteristic of us noted way back in 1840 when Alexis de Tocqueville came here to do a study on prisons, and he went back to France and wrote Democracy in America, and where he was giving lectures in France saying, those Americans just love committees. Somebody's barn burns down, they have a committee. Somebody becomes widowed. You're talking about the generous spirit of the American people. Now, I think that for Christians among us, we should recognize that when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, I'm pretty sure he did not mean that thou shalt not steal unless you got a majority vote in Congress. And that's what we're doing. We're taking by force what belongs to one person, and I don't consider that moral at all.
I actually agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I just like to...
And then we'll give somebody else a chance, but I just like you quoted Madison, and I have a quote from Madison. And Madison is the acknowledged father of the Constitution, so he ought to know what's in it. Now, in 1794, Congress appropriated $15,000 to help some French refugees. And James Madison, stood on the floor of the House irate. And he said, I'm quoting here, I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending on the objects of benevolence the money of their constituents. Now, if you look at the federal budget today, 2/3 to 3/4 of it is spent on the objects of benevolence. And then also, Madison and others said, Jefferson said as well, that Congress there's no legitimate power for them to engage in charity.
But do you agree with Madison that America is founded fundamentally not in self-interest, but in the moral principle of freedom that has to do also with how we treat one another?
Of course. I think how we treat one another does not, when I'm saying, I think it's evil to treat one another, for me to go up and say, Andrea, I want you to help him out, and if you don't help him out, I'm going to put you in jail. If you don't willingly give up your money, I'm going to put you in jail. I think that's not treating our fellow man very well.